Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity College. We hope you are all safe and well, and depending on where you live, not being too adversely impacted tonight by the severe winter weather we've been experiencing this week. Thank you for joining us for another virtual Long Walk presentation. Over 5,000 of you have attended at least one of these presentations, with almost half of those not having attended an in-person Trinity event in recent years. Thus, we're delighted that so many of you are connecting back with the Trinity community during these challenging times. The majority of our events have been recorded and archived, so it's easy to go back and watch or listen at your own convenience. Simply type "virtual long walk" into your preferred browser and you'll find them. Tonight, we're especially proud to highlight the work of a Trinity alumnus, who's also a Trinity parent, during Black History Month, as his work is garnering international attention as our nation celebrates this important moment. We're also proud that our guest speaker has paid it back to the college by hiring a young Trinity alum, as so many of you do, and that she has agreed to moderate tonight's discussion. Chandler Solimine graduated from Trinity College in 2019 with a degree in American Studies. She played field hockey and ice hockey for the Bantams. Since graduation, she has worked as a business analyst for Burst, a mobile video platform for broadcasters, media companies, and brands, as well as assisted Bryant McBride in endeavors surrounding his acclaimed documentary, Willie. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to you, Chandler. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Here with me is Bryant McBride, as Steve mentioned. Bryant was the class of 1988 at Trinity, and I have had the honor and been privileged to work with him since I graduated about a year and a half ago. So Bryant has been an amazing mentor of mine so far. And tonight we'll be discussing the making of the Willie documentary, what we've been working on together for the past year and a half or so, and where we plan on taking the film from here on out. So with that, Bryant, I'll pass it over to you to further introduce yourself and dive into it.
Thanks, Chandler. Appreciate it. First, thank you, Steve, and everyone at the college for welcoming us and taking the time, and to all of you for tuning in. It's a real honor for me to be here. I'm a proud Trinity alum and proud parent. My son Jake just graduated last year, so it's deep roots. Lots of wonderful friends. When people ask me about my Trinity experience, I always refer to one thing. I haven't, in more than 30 years since I've graduated, I have not gone 1 month without talking to someone that I went to school with at Trinity. The bonds are really deep, and I'm grateful for them. This project that I'm working on, the Willie documentary, has been an absolute labor of love. A project that's near and dear to my heart, that frankly I started working on in the early 90s. Not the film itself, but the actual meeting Willie and finding Willie, and with a lot of help from other people. It's a movement. It's an initiative that we have taken from really an idea on my desk, and at the urging of a friend of mine named Lou Vero, who was at U.S.A. Hockey at the time. We really set out to make the game more inclusive, to do what hadn't been done before, and that is to provide opportunity for all kids who want to play the game. And we saw that Lou suggested that we talk to Willie, and we saw that we had a chance to do something special with a really special person, and it's led to just all kinds of amazing things that have happened as a result. The most important of which is introducing kids to the game, helping kids get access to the game, making hockey more inclusive, making the sport better, we hope, by attracting an audience that otherwise might not have participated and or attended or been part of the fabric of the game. So that was our intent on day one, and it remains our intent. Want to run a quick video. We'll talk a lot about the film and the amazing team that made it, led by our director, Laurence Mathieu Leger, who was incredible, brilliant filmmaker, and we'll talk more about those efforts. But we'll also talk post-film, and that's where Chandler has come in, and that's where we've worked really closely on on taking it from beyond the screen to action. And that's something that we're working on right now. And I think this film, this short video, I'll tee it up. It's about a minute long, and it happened a week ago this past Monday. This was a Zoom call that we had for students across Canada that was led by Willie himself and by the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, Sarah Nurse, a Canadian Olympian, a gentleman named Mo Hashim, and one of his students in his program, Hockey for Youth, named Brittany, who was exceptional. And we talked a lot about lessons from Willie.com, which we'll dive into a little bit on this session. These are the kinds of events that Chandler has coordinated, dug in with the help of a lot of people to make what we're doing actionable, to go from aspirational to actionable. And so with that preface, if you'll run the film, we'll start there.
Welcome to Lessons from Willie, a conversation with Canadians.
The Lessons from Willie initiative that you're talking about, which aims to spark conversations on social justice and racism, highlights not only what you overcame, but how much you inspired the next generation.
You have to believe in yourself and feel good about yourself and like yourself. I obviously tell these boys and girls, you can do anything you set your mind to do, if you feel strongly within your heart and within your mind, and it's so very, very true. But you have to work hard. There's no substitute for hard work.
Coast to coast to coast, and we're going to start actually in Bryant's hometown of Sault Ste. Marie. Now we're headed up to the Northwest Territories and Yellowknife to Miramichi, New Brunswick. The west is Surrey, BC, home of the Bear Creek School. Okay, to Alberta we go. Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador.
People may not remember how many goals you scored or how good you are, but they definitely remember how you made them feel and the impact that you've had on them.
I will say merci beaucoup, miigwech, thank you.
That short video encapsulated a lot of work. And I guess by way of context, I'll start with where the idea for the film came from. In about 3 years ago, Willie invited myself and my family to the Boston Garden to commemorate the 60th anniversary of his first game when he broke the color barrier playing for the Bruins. And we went to the Boston Garden, and we were there with senior NHL people, including the commissioner. And I suggested to Gary Bettman at that time, Willie's 82. We've got to get him in the Hall of Fame. This is an opportunity again for generational impact. We need to do this, and Gary isn't involved in that process. But he said, yeah, no, it's an important idea. What can I do to help, without being directly involved? And I set out that night as a mission to get Willie into the Hockey Hall of Fame. That I felt was incredibly important. Willie deserved it as a builder, not as a player. He only played 45 games in the NHL, 2 decades of playing pro hockey, as for those of you that have seen the film. But he went on, I hired him at the National Hockey League when he was 61, and he went on to work for the league, and he's still, to this day, he's still working for the National Hockey League. He's 85. We added up the cumulative total of all of his travel in that time, from the ages of 61 to 83 when he got into the Hall. It was more than 6 years. And I'll come back to that. That's an important point, that we needed a piece of scalable content. He's an amazing ambassador. He's the most earnest, gracious, humble individual you'll ever meet. But he couldn't be everywhere. So that evening in the Boston Garden, we really set upon the mission of getting Willie into the Hockey Hall of Fame. I live in Lexington, Massachusetts. I have a place in New York City, and I was sitting on my stoop in my place in New York, and my neighbor walked by, Laurence, and I told her the story of Willie's travels, and that we're going to try and get him in the Hall of Fame. And she said, we need to make this film. And it hit me, I said, you're absolutely right. So we quickly we raised the money and garnered the support of Ted Leonsis, who owns the Capitals, Sheila Johnson, Earl Stafford, 2 of the 3 Black owners in the NHL, and a whole host of other people. Everything that we say this evening, it's been an army behind this effort, led by the great filmmakers who made it, Laurence, Rosella Tursi, Ebion Behe, just super smart people who everything was our first film. So it was a lot of trial and error. And it was a side project. I do have a full-time business that Chandler works for. And we've been hard at work building that business, but this had to get done for a lot of reasons. So the film resulted from that conversation. 9 months later, we put it out there, and we were lucky enough to have some great acclaim and a great reception from very early on. So I'll stop there for a second and take a breath. But that's how the film came to be. That was the genesis of it.
And Bryant, do you want to talk a little about just kind of how Willie's story transcends beyond just hockey, and why hockey is the vehicle in this story, and why you always say hockey is just such an important sport for kids to pick up?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I played hockey I'm 55. I played hockey for 50 years. I've been involved in hockey for that time. And it's a thread that's run through everything in my life. It's how I ended up at Trinity. John Dunham and Bob Lober were two of the reasons that I came to Trinity after a PG year at Williston, Northampton, West Point, and then to Trinity. And when I was leaving West Point, I had a few ideas and destinations in mind, but Trinity was the one I chose, and hockey was what brought me there. One of the things that brought me there, the academics, obviously, and a lot else as well. But the film itself is a testament and honors Willie's incredible impact on the game. That's first and foremost. And we wanted it also to support his candidacy into the Hall of Fame. But we also wanted to expand people's apertures from here to here, right? And in doing so, make a social justice film disguised as a hockey movie. Being a Black hockey player is not a walk in the park, right? It's not simple, and I've had to navigate for a long time. And I acknowledge my privilege as an athlete, and the acceptance more readily accepted. I was more readily accepted than others because I was an athlete, and I acknowledge that privilege. I mean, that's just the reality. As well, I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, so I learned how to navigate very white spaces very early on. I knew how to do that, and that helped me incredibly in figuring out my path to where I wanted to go. Not everybody has that advantage, so I want to say that up front. That's really important. That said, hearing Willie's story about the name calling and everything that he went through, everything that he had to just navigate, and everything that he had to weather to make an impact in the game, to be in the game, right, was extraordinary. Juxtaposing that against young men and women who are teenagers who are in the game now, and showing that on film, and that it's still happening, was one of the things that we wanted to hit really hard. That was really important. I tip my hat to Laurence. She pushed boundaries that I probably wouldn't have pushed myself. I know I wouldn't have pushed myself. So this film was, for me, a deep dive, a real deep dive into social justice, and into reading. There's 5 books that I talk about a lot: The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. That was my own personal deep dive into the Black experience, and really understanding the history, really understanding the 360 complete in every crack and crevice of this society, what has happened. And frankly, to be just really direct about it, the insidious intent with which it was done. That was startling to me. And I'm ashamed that I read them in my 50s and not in my teen years, or books like it in my teen years or in my 20s. So I learned a lot, and I did my own personal deep dive in that regard. So I took a lot from it personally. And it's impacted me. That combined with George Floyd and everything else that's happening in the world, it's really made me step back and reassess. So hockey is the metaphor. It is the thread that runs through everything that we're talking about and that we're doing. But we wanted it to be a way for people to dive into a really amazing story about an amazing gentleman, but take more from it than that. So that was the impetus, and that's where we start with the project. There's so much more to it, but that was the beginning.
Very well said. And I think that lends well to kind of the start of the educational components and, you know, why this film can be used for in classrooms or in locker rooms and, you know, be used as a teaching tool, which is a lot of what we've been doing and has sort of culminated to the Lessons from Willie project that we've been working on.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to show the film at the outset. You know, that all those people on that screen, and I was remiss in not mentioning Ron McLean, who is just an extraordinary individual, has really poured himself into this effort as well. But so many people behind the scenes, the investors in what we did, again, the creative team that made it happen. And then, you know, Chandler was not part of that creative team. She came afterwards, but, you know, a whole bunch of us picked it up in terms of distribution, in terms of the educational component, which was really important to me. You know, I'm not a traditional filmmaker. I'm not. And the film world is interesting, but it's not as interesting to me, and it's not the goal that is, I think, more important than that, which is to spur social justice conversations, to use the film as a tool to start those conversations, right? And hockey just happened to be the realm in which I was lucky enough to know a lot of people, have some reach, could make some impact, get access to the commissioner and to NHL footage and all the pieces, to the prime minister, all the pieces that that we could put together to really make an impact on people through a story. And within that story, to highlight some things that traditionally may not have been highlighted. The relationship between Willie and his best friend, Junior Doherty. That's a 70-year relationship between a white guy and a black guy that you don't see that a lot on film. You know, Laurent's showcased that. And that was really, really brilliant to do that, I thought. What can happen when a community, mostly white community, embraces everyone in their town, as Fredericton did with Willie O'Ree. And he rose to incredible heights because of the support he got at a very young age in that maritime city. And all of that culminated in lessonsfromwillie.com. Be sure to check it out. Our partner on it is the National Hockey League. I sat and put this together with Kim Davis and Gary Bettman, but 3 years ago, where we knew we had an opportunity to honor Willie, get him in the hall, but most importantly, provide a tool for educators and for families and coaches to have these hard, uncomfortable conversations. A lot of people don't want to have these conversations, but it is, from a macro standpoint, I firmly believe it is the greatest wound in the history of this country. We just haven't dealt with it in a really direct, immediate way. And unlike Rwanda, South Africa, Canada, the Indian resettlement conversations, we've never had truth and reconciliation in this country. And unlike Germany, which had truth and reconciliation right after World War II, and they had it because we made them. We made them step back and understand what their leadership did and what happened, is why the war happened and why so many people died. The question is, do we have the courage to do it to ourselves? And I hope the answer is yes. But this was our small part to provide a film and tools to go with it. And where that originally started was at our first festival that we entered was called the Hot Docs Film Festival in Toronto, where we ended up coming in second out of a huge number of films in the audience award voting. But we won a prize for I can't remember the name of it, but the exact name, but it was basically films that could have educational impact. So the Ontario government and Hot Docs wrote a curriculum, teacher's guide on how to use our film as a teaching tool. So that was the beginning. That was the kernel of an idea that then we could take it to make it available to educators, coaches, parents who wanted to use the film as a tool. So when you go to lessonsfromwillie.com, you get a shortened lesson plan version of the film, 52 minutes instead of 89, if you register for free. You also get that teacher's guide, improved and polished 5th through 8th grade, 5th through 8th grade, and through 9 through 12, where a teacher can pick up that guide and have, across multiple disciplines, a tool that'll help them have these conversations. Also, if those teachers and educators that sign up, coaches that sign up, you're automatically registered for a Zoom call where NHL players and women pro players and Olympians will get zoomed right into your classroom or into your team to continue this conversation. That's at the heart of why we did it. That's the payoff, and we're going to continue to do that for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I think noting just those Zoom panels and how hands-on this educational experience is, it's a very different learning experience when you're having a conversation with someone, you know, who looks like you, who you've seen on TV, who's, you know, skating in an NHL game or an NWHL game. So I think that's a really special piece of this whole project. And Bryant, do we want to go into how this has become even universal and the work we've done with the State Department?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a great point. We were fortunate enough to be selected by a program the State Department runs called the American Film Showcase. And it's pretty heady stuff, and we're really thrilled. That's when they take the film and they travel it to consulates and embassies in countries all over the world. And that was really great to be accepted, but we wanted to do more than that. So we called our friends at Global Affairs Canada, and they joined in as well. So on February 23rd, we're going to be launching the film. We're going to be launching the film to 40 plus countries around the world, to their consulates and embassies, via a global watch party. And it's going to travel all over the world for the next 2-3 years. A lot of virtual until COVID subsides. But we're thrilled to be part of that. That's really exciting to us. It was exciting to have the Consul General here in Boston, a gentleman named David Alward at the time, connect us to the Prime Minister, and he agreed to be in the film. So, you know, the U.S. State Department, Global Affairs Canada, they've played an instrumental role in distributing and helping people learn about the film, in a role that we didn't expect at the outset. But through the work of the team that made the film, through our investors, Chandler, Chandler's first job out of school, she was thrown in the deep end with my startup, my company Burst, which is going great guns, and so much to do there on an every hour basis. But then our night and weekend job was this project. And I've had some great hires out of Trinity, and no offense to any of them, but Chandler's the best hire we've ever made. So
I paid him to say that, just so everyone knows. Thank you though, Bryant. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I will say, having since school, having this hybrid experience of being able to be on the Burst side of Bryant's world and being involved in a very small company, and seeing every moving part of what the tech team is doing, what Bryant is doing, and everything down to the bottom has just been such an amazing learning experience. And then having the Willie side of Bryant's world has just totally opened my eyes to, how to be an entrepreneur and how you can be an entrepreneur in this social space. And, the work I've been involved in with Bryant, I just feel very, fortunate that it has opened my eyes to how much I didn't know and how much I still need to learn on these topics. And, it's everyone's responsibility to sort of get their hand on the oar and pull. And I feel, very lucky to have a very small role in something that has opened my eyes and can open other people's eyes.
Well, that's, and I appreciate that. And that's the hope, right? Is that the film can Willie, there's a segment in the film where we talk about Willie opening eyes, and he did that, right? By being a black guy on the ice, by helping children for just decades and exposing them to the game. But it's also to spur these conversations, the hard conversations that are going on in the country right now, through hockey, right? And hockey is seen traditionally as a not a very welcoming place for people of color. I mean, the intent is to change that. To frame it in just pure business parlance, it's an imperative. By the year 2044, the majority of people, all people in North America, will be visible minorities. And if the game doesn't get in front of that, game I care very deeply about, doesn't get in front of that, it'll atrophy. That'll be a problem. And there are lots of businesses facing the same predicament. And that demographic shift, that big movement, is something that is going to happen whether we're ready for it or not. I'm feeling it in politics, feeling it in lots of different verticals in the business sector. So, as Trinity alumni, as leaders in so many fields, coming to grips and coming to terms with everything that's happening and changing, having these hard conversations, understanding what systemic racism is, acknowledging it, acknowledging the system. Isabel Wilkerson writes beautifully about this, and just so importantly, points out in Caste, for instance, that the Nazi Party during the Nuremberg, when they were not the Nuremberg trials that followed the war, but the Nuremberg laws that were put in place in the early 30s, she found the primary materials from those conversations. And as they were trying to figure out their Jewish problem and what they were going to do, right, they modeled it after Jim Crow. It's realizations like that just make you sit back and just, with disbelief when I read it, right? But that's irrefutable. Those are facts, right? And you start to weave some of the things that you learn, that I learned in my deep dive into understanding how we got here, and you start to personalize it. It starts to really hit you when that happens. My parents, for instance, were married in the late 60s. Would have been, my dad's white, my mom's black. It would have been illegal for my parents to marry in 32 states. But the punchline is, the last of those laws banning intermarriage came off the books in 2000 in Alabama, where 40% of people voted to keep it. This is current. This is still happening, right? Just as Willie was called names in the 1950s and 60s and 70s while he played hockey, it's still happening on ice surfaces all over North America. It needs to stop. So anything that we can do to bolster that effort, we're going to do, and that'll never end.
And Brian, I think, those important conversations, them starting at such a young age and having younger people, feel comfortable talking about these things is very important. Do you want to talk about just the grassroots efforts that you had
Yes.
been involved in? And, now in the NHL, there's 10 times as many players of color than when you started it.
Yeah, when I started, it's a really important point. When I started at the NHL, there were 3 players of color in the NHL. There's now 35, so that's 10x in 20 years. That's not bad, right? It's not actually 30 years, right, from when I first started. So that's growth, but 30 years it took for 10x. How do we make that, with the demographic changes happening? How do we make that 350, right? To mirror the demographics of North America. So that's an important metric, and that's on one side of the coin, is how many NHL players of color are there, and that's an important metric, but not as important as the other side of that coin. The other side of that coin is based on the argument I make all the time that the most important sport in the world for kids of color to play is hockey. And people are especially friends of color, are like, what are you talking about, right? You're not welcome there. That's crazy. And I explain it to them really simply. I'm a dad, and if I can only give my kids one thing, literally, if I can only give them one thing, it would be resilience, the ability to get back up when they get knocked down. And hockey's a great equalizer. When you're 4, 5, 6 years old, you're out there for the first time. Nobody's, ever skated. No one's born with skates on. So that's a fantastic equalizer. And that you get out there, and the first thing you do is you fall on your butt and you learn how to get up. And that's a muscle, right? That is developed over and over and over again as part of that mastery from October through April. When you ascend in that first experience, and you experience mastery and you experience resilience, if there's one thing that kids of color in this country need, it's that, right? That ability to get back up, to be resilient, to develop that muscle that can then be applied to lots of different things. That's really, really important. And that's the measurement, that's the metric, that funnel filling at the very top, when those parents, when that mom is doing that calculus of where the family's going to spend her disposable time, their disposable income, their resources, their family, precious family memories and moments. Are they going to spend it in a hockey rink or not? And if they don't feel welcome in that setting, they're definitely not. So as important as equipment is, as important as ice time is, and all the other factors that go into the equation of playing and participating, it's not simple. That cultural aspect of feeling welcome, to feeling as though you belong, it's really about belonging when you boil it all away. That is critical. And that's something that we're really focused on, and we're going to be working on going forward in a lot of different ways, that we'll let the world know about in the next few months. But there's more coming. There's a lot more coming. We're just revving the engine to get things up and going to a degree that they haven't in the past. I will also mention that in stepping back and looking at the forest amongst all these trees that we focus on, and making the film, and Willie getting into Hall of Fame, and all of these monumental steps along the way, I've never ever felt the palpable momentum that I feel now. The recommitment that the NHL has made to this effort, the recommitment to hiring Kim Davis, who everyone Google Kim Davis, NHL, just total badass. I mean, she is getting stuff done. She has my old job. She's terrific. And they are pouring resources and time, but not just them. There are thousands of people across this landscape working on this now. And there weren't when it started as an idea, the idea to hire Willie and to bring all of these programs. There were 4 of them when we started. It's now over 30. That's a little legacy that I'm proud to have at the NHL to this day. Those programs are working and providing opportunities. But I've never seen so many people pulling on the rope at the same time ever in this effort. And I'm really thrilled about that.
That also speaks, Bryant, very well to just the community behind our Lessons from Willie effort, and the so many different groups through your relationships that you've built over the past 30 years, from people at USA Hockey to Hockey Canada. I was definitely just blown away at how many people were so willing to support this, and spread the word and get it into their community groups, and host a screening, or show their audiences lessonsfromwillie.com. And it definitely was a community effort, and I was very impressed to see how many groups from everywhere just wanted to be involved and wanted to help.
As a result of George Floyd, as you saw in the makeup of the demonstrations in the streets, there's so many people who want to help and who want to pitch in and want to aid in any way that they can. And I think what we're seeing is the ripple effect of that. People want to and can, they want to do the work, right? One of my pet peeves is, the Instagram post with the black screen. Okay, I did something. Come on, guys, we can do better. I'm doing this in hockey because that's where I have some reach, and I have some ability to impact it. Everybody has their own realm. If there's one takeaway from tonight, it's do the work. Read the books, do a deep dive, really understand what's happening out there so that you can bring empathy to this effort and put yourself in somebody else's place, right? And I did that deep dive, my own background, again, belatedly, but I did it. But have I done that in the LGBTQ plus space? No, I haven't. Have I done that in the disabled space? No, I haven't. Have I done that in the Hispanic or Latinx space? No, I haven't. Bits and pieces, but not to the level I need to, and I will, because I really want to understand what other people are experiencing and bringing to this so that we can find a way to heal and we can find a way to work together on this. So your realm, your what you impact and what you can influence, make a difference there, right? That's where it's gonna really show up, when there's enough people that have said, I'm gonna make a difference no matter what. I'm gonna get smarter. I'm gonna do a deep dive. I'm gonna learn the facts, and then I'm going to apply that in any way that I can. So it's been wonderful to see all of those people that Chandler mentioned and more, and they all need hurting, and that's what she does for a living, is kind of make sure that everything, all the trains run on time behind the scenes with all of my wild, crazy vision and ideas, that it actually turns into action rather than just, aspiration. Because aspiration is great, but it's frustrating when it doesn't become realized. So it's been really fun to see people embrace these efforts so readily, so quickly, and look for a way to make real substantive change. That's been really fun to see.
And Bryant, you mentioned your vision, I will say, when I started working for you way back when, you had this vision of getting the film into schools and it reaching this many number of kids and having this really meaningful impact in all these people. And, it was hard getting to the point where now we're seeing it on screen and it's brought to life, but you made it happen. So, it's about doing the work, and it's not an easy thing, but, figuring out what needs to be done to get to that point, I think is key.
That wasn't simple either. To be
Nope.
frank about it, that wasn't simple, because
Yeah.
we were down a pretty traditional, let's make a film, win some awards, get distributed. The vision was bigger. It just was. And people are like, oh, aren't you so surprised that that's no, this is on purpose. We did this, and we had some really philosophical differences with along the way in making the film and getting it, not making it as much, but getting it to the point of it being able to, we think, make a difference, some form of difference here, rather than just being another film that sits on Peacock or on Netflix or wherever. We're on Peacock if you want to see the film, see it again, or point your friends there. So we're really thinking, we're doing everything we can to make it live beyond the screen, so that people can put it into practice, so that they can so that they can share this film knowing that it's a story that you're going to cry and laugh and it'll be triumphant at the end, but that people are going to see young people, Black people, and brown people's experiences in a different light because we made the film. We're hearing it directly from them. I should also say that there's such a this film was made by a diverse group. I was in the guts of it as well, but by a diverse group of women. And that's really important. I don't think a man would have made a different movie. And the movie that we got was exactly what we wanted. It was brilliant. And I tip my hat to the creative team who just did a great job. We've taken it from there to places that movies traditionally don't go, and we intend to do more. So you want to open up to questions, Chandler?
Yeah, perfect. So everyone can begin submitting questions to the Q&A box if you have any, and we can start answering from there. And I did notice in the chat, for those who didn't see, Peter Friedman mentioned that he said, I just want you guys to know that a bunch of coaches and parents were talking about how much they loved this movie at my 12-year-old's practice last week, which is pretty awesome.
That's awesome. The books, again, somebody also just asked about the names of the books. It's the warmth of other suns. We'll post it in the chat. How's that?
Yeah, I got that.
You got it, Chandler? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
One other quick story that I wanted to tell about Willie, that I think is really encapsulates who he is, and this whole thing doesn't happen without Willie O'Ree, and I want to be completely direct about that. All of the effort that we've put into it, and the team that made the film put into it, and others, it doesn't happen if Willie is just not this extraordinary person. I mean, he really is. He's amazing. The story I like to tell about Willie that I think encapsulates him best, there's so many, but in his office, if you look at the film, you'll see on the wall a plaque that was given to him by the government of Canada. It's called the Order of Canada. It's the highest civilian honor given by the Canadian government, and he's one of very few recipients. It's a big deal, and it's framed. It's really big. It's beautiful, and right next to it are two plaques. This is after Willie retired. He went in 1980. He went and did a whole bunch of jobs, fed his family, and and never bitter, not in any way, shape, or form. And next to this beautiful, incredible honor given by the Canadian government are two plaques when he was a security guard at the Hotel del Coronado. Literally right next to it on his wall, implying that all work's important. That whatever the task is in front of you is what you should knock down, because it's important, and you should do it with pride and to the best of your ability. That's what Willie does. Everything he does to the best of his ability.
So we have a couple of questions, Bryant.
Sure.
So Alan has asked, how welcoming are the skating rinks, youth teams, and coaches to young Black and brown hockey players?
How welcoming are they?
How welcoming, yes.
I think it's on one side, the camaraderie that you feel as a hockey player is I've never experienced anything like it. I mean, amazing teammates that I had throughout my journey. But was I called names? Yeah, I was called names. Did they sting? Absolutely, they stung. And those things are still going on all over the country. And people like to say, well, they're anecdotal and they happen every so. Well, if they're happening every so often with rapidity and being repeated, then it's not every so often, right? So, what I'm really focused on going forward, what we're really focused on going forward is getting the data. I'm as close to this as anybody. Have I ever talked to 800 families of color about their experience? No, I haven't. We need to do that. We need to take a deep dive and get the data so we can really understand. You can't change what you can't measure, right? So we want to put rigorous quantitative and qualitative research to some of these issues so that we can really understand how to change the culture of the sport. And people are like, oh, well, that's hard. How are you going to change the culture? Well, we weren't wearing seatbelts 40 years ago either, okay? 40 years ago, you'd walk into someone's house and light a cigarette. Like, how does that happen, right? But that's what people used to do. It's not acceptable anymore. And to narrow it down to hockey, U.S.A. Hockey decided it was really a safety issue to teach kids when they're checked, not to check kids from behind, near the boards especially. And when you're checked, to keep your head up when you go into the boards. If you put your head down, you're going to get spinal cord injuries and real trouble. And that's happened to people that were close to me. So they decided to implement a program called Heads Up Hockey, and they made it mandatory, part of the certification process, and it went all over the country, and those incidents have dramatically decreased. We can do the same there too.
Here's one you can speak well to, Bryant. Are there significant differences between social injustice in Canada versus the United States?
It's a great question. There are dramatic differences. Canada, a lot of people kind of gloss over Canada as, this place that is free and, there's equity. And I mean, the way that Canadians treated the Indigenous peoples is startling. I mean, it was an awful, just such an awful, awful chapter in Canadian history that people, again, don't talk about. I mean, it needs to be. They did have peace and reconciliation starting, I believe, in 2015, and that process is ongoing. And Prime Minister Trudeau has been very outspoken in acknowledging that. But it's just an ugly history that they're wrestling with. But they're wrestling with it. The dissonance from the outset of this country of land of the free, home of the brave. This is awesome. We're all in this together. Everyone's equal. Oh yeah, slavery. That dissonance exists today, and we just have never dealt with it, right? And if the recent events of, earlier this year, January 6th, don't give us pause and make us reflect to do a little introspection as a country, I'm not sure what will. Hope that answers the question.
I think so. So Bryant, why do we?
If my slap shot or your slap shot is better, and
Oh no.
pretty content with this.
We'll have to give it a shot one day.
Love that.
Back at Capel, yep. Bryant, why did you decide to focus? I mean, obviously you have had a very long relationship with Willie, but focusing on him, obviously he's blazed trails, but versus the other prominent Black players who have been playing hockey before him and after, what was it about Willie's story, or maybe, mentioning the other players who?
Sure. One prominent player that deserves mention is a gentleman named Herb Carnegie. Herb was he played in the 1940s for a team called the Quebec Aces. Played with his brother Manny, with Ozzie Carnegie and a gentleman named Manny McIntyre. They formed an all-black line for the Quebec Aces. And one of the rookies, young players on that team, I don't know if he was a rookie, but he was very early in his career in the minors, was Jean Bellavo. And of the great Montreal Canadiens teams he won 8 or 9 Stanley Cups. I mean, he's just unbelievable player and one of the greatest ever to live. And he, when asked, swore one of the top 5 players he ever played with was Herb Carnegie. And Herb was that good. He was a superstar in the game, and he ended up on a tryout with the Toronto Maple Leafs and a gentleman named Conn Smythe. And you've heard that, many of you hockey fans have heard that name before. Conn Smythe is now there's the MVP of the playoffs. The trophy is named after him. At the time, he was the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Herb was a standout in that tryout, and Conn Smythe said to him and a room of reporters, because it was what was said at the time, he said, "I would pay anyone $10,000 to paint him white." Herb never played a game in the National Hockey League. One of Willie's heroes, he grew up admiring. Herb told me that story in his 70s. He passed away at 92 about 8-9 years ago. And he told me that story in his 70s and cried his eyes out. So it was something that he lived with his whole life. That said, what Herb did, and this is incredible, and this is some of the history that people just don't quite know, just like Conn Smythe, he said what he did. We still have this trophy. We have our own stuff, monuments and historical stuff, baggage to deal with. And Conn Smythe did some amazing things too, right? So it's complicated. That said, it was an awful thing to say, and it kept the guy out of the game for forever. But the way that Herb reacted to that, what he did was he started the same month. This is amazing. We just put this together a month ago, just looking through the timelines and understanding. The same month that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on that public bus in Montgomery, Alabama, December 1955, Herb went and started a program called the Future Aces in the Toronto School. And for the next 40, 50 years, he just did the work. What we talked about earlier. He used hockey as a bridge, as a way to bring people together. And his family, through his foundation, still does that today. So there's stories like that all over the hockey landscape, all over the sports landscape that also need to be told. We focused on Willie because he was, he was alive, and he had been so he'd been so overlooked. People had just really forgotten about who he was and his contribution to the game and what he had to offer the game. Still at 61, he started a whole new career and hasn't stopped. So he's deserved every accolade that he's receiving now.
And he's probably one of the most charismatic people I've ever met. So
Want to tell everyone about the first time you met him?
Right when I started with Bryant, one of the first screenings that we worked on was in Martha's Vineyard. Great early perk. So we went there, met Willie at, it was like this really cool brewery on the island. And, you know, Willie's having a couple beers and we're just hanging out with him in the back and end up just like playing cornhole with him. And he's just, I mean, he whipped Bryant in my butt for sure. He's a natural athlete, but yeah, he's just an amazing person. You'll see it if you watch the movie, but even more so in person. He's just, his passion is contagious and just such a warm man.
Somebody just asked the question, when I played for Trinity, I want to answer this one directly. When I played for Trinity, did I feel as though Coach Dunham and my teammates had my back? I could not say strongly enough how much they had my back and how much I had their back. You know, that was a team that I was fortunate enough to be on 3 championship teams when I was at Trinity. Have to plug class of 88 there. I think we were 52-4-1 or something crazy. But just great teams and great recruiting by John Dunham. Just to have grit. We had grit. And that meant that everyone knew that when you went in the corner, somebody was there to back you up. And my teammates backed me up always in incredible ways. So it was the legendary group of people. We had fun. We managed to have fun on a few nights too.
That's awesome. One of the questions, are coaches trying to curb the negative language among players and parents? And Bryant, maybe you can speak to the work you do in Lexington too with your youth hockey group.
Yeah, I'm still at the rink. I mean, my season finished yesterday. We had an abbreviated season, but I just love being in a rink. My kids are now aged out of hockey, but I'm there as you know, a commissioner of sorts, and my 5 to 10-year-old Lexington Bedford Youth Hockey League, run with amazing people. The U.S.A. Hockey Volunteer of the Year last year was a gentleman named Hank Mans, who built that league from nothing, and I'm one of the many stewards that he's left it to, and we feel a huge responsibility in our town to provide this ecosystem where kids can experience what we discussed earlier, and coaches in our town, I mean, it's just zero tolerance, right? The problem that exists across the nation right now is that often there will be racial slurs or something, or misogynistic slurs or whatever they are that are said, and the game is fast and there's a lot of people moving around, and refs will say, you know, hey, I didn't hear anything, I can't call anything. That's become a real pressure point in the game. There are people working at that right now to try and figure out this isn't politicizing hockey. This is about opportunity. This is about belonging. This is about ensuring that everyone feels as though it's a safe environment for their kids. And so there's a deep dive going on right now by the NHL, by U.S.A. Hockey, by Hockey Canada, to eliminate it. And, you know, I make the argument all the time, kids don't want that attention. You know, for a kid to say, hey, this happened to me. Oh, well, you're just saying that the ref didn't hear it. You know, as a person of color, you don't want to throw yourself in the middle of that. You just, especially if you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. It just stings. It's awful, right? It's the last thing that you want to deal with when you're there to escape and to play and to be with your friends and to, you know, do something that you love. You want to inject that into a game for your advantage? No, it's just, I'm not saying it will never happen, but it's very, very rare. So the approach, the zero tolerance approach is needed. It's needed. The culture of the game won't change until we figure that out. That is one of the biggest obstacles to progress right now.
And I think another big obstacle in terms of, youth hockey is accessibility. What do you feel the NHL and just other hockey groups are doing to diversity and increase the accessibility in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, there's just barriers of entry, right? That's what we started working on very early when I started at the NHL, getting sticks in kids' hands, regardless of what they had on their feet. I built ice rinks. One of the things I am most proud of is taking a small part in building Trinity's ice rink. And by the way, the person who cut the ribbon that day was Willie O'Ree. He came into Hartford and helped us open the rink at Trinity. We've got great pictures from that day. So accessibility is critical, right? Equipment, ice time, all of those things. But interestingly, just as you saw in the change that I mentioned earlier, and you saw in the last election, and the demographics are shifting, right? The trope, the unbelievably backwards trope that all people of color are poor. Come on, guys, we can do better, right? I mean, the suburbs now are very, very, very diverse, right? People have, not everyone, but I'm generalizing, and I apologize, but the game is accessible to people of color now in ways that it wasn't 20 years ago. The question is, do they feel welcome? So ensuring that there is a person in each, just as though there's a safety person in every hockey association that talks about safety, that talks about fundraising, that talks about all the mechanics that make it go. There needs someone to be extending that olive branch to growing with, I mentioned insidious intent on just everything that permeates, life in terms of race in this country. It's just incredible the things that have been done. That same force, that same intent, be it in hockey, be it in STEM, be it in education, in law. I mean, you name it. That it has to be met with that same intent to undo a lot of what has been done. And until that intent is forceful and continuous, things won't yield. They won't change. That's the effort in hockey and beyond.
I know we only have a couple more minutes, Bryant, but maybe this is a good last question. Do you have any advice on how to build resiliency?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, Chandler mentioned our full-time vocation, which is building our company, Burst, which is a young company that we've been working at really hard for a long time, and the resiliency. I take so many lessons from Willie, from that side of our world to the Burst side of our world. Right? I'm a crazy entrepreneur. I don't give up. I mean, it's just, I'm not a skinny guy, and I've managed to drag myself over 26 marathons. So resiliency is, as I think, looking back on it in hindsight, right? It was instilled in me by my mom and my dad, right? Because they knew what I was going to face. They just knew. So I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice, right? When the mechanism that is this, again, to be direct about it, there was every 3 days for the first 4 decades of the past century, someone of color was hung in this country, right? And the mechanism behind that was stay in your place. I experienced that in business today. I felt that, I've heard that, stay in your place. So for those that don't understand that and don't internalize that, like I have to, figure it out, do some work, right? Stop the performative stuff and do some work. So that's where resiliency comes from. I've had no choice. And I've been lucky because I've had advantages that other people of color have never, ever experienced or will ever have. So I understand, I have perspective. I wasn't born on third base. I was not. And you need less resiliency when you're born on third base. And I'm not speaking to anyone directly, but it's just the truth, right? And this country is not equal. We have to make it. We have to work to make it so.
Well said, Bryant. As we're closing up, Bryant, do you want to just add on any finishing remarks or any other questions in the box that you specifically want to address?
Yeah, a couple of quick calls to action. Go to lessonsfromwillie.com and check it out. Share it with share it with your kids' teachers, share it with your kids yourself, share it with the teams you coach, share it with friends. There's a lot there that can help people. That's one. Watch the film and share it with your friends. It's on Peacock for free. And it's I've watched it a couple hundred times. I cried all the same parts still. It's emotional to kind of see the work play out. The work that the team did in building it was extraordinary. And so if you spread the word and make sure that that people get a chance to see it, because it seems to be resonating, and we want that to extend far and wide. So thank you all for the opportunity, Steve, President Berger Sweeney, and others. We really appreciate this audience. Chandler, for all the hard work that you've done and are doing. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you all for taking time tonight.
Thanks, everyone.